Lakeland Public Television and area news partners are proud to present Debate Night 2012, a look at our area legislative candidates. And now, the State House of Representatives District 10A debate. Your moderator tonight is Ray Gildau.
To our second debate this evening on our debate for 2012 from Lakeland Public Television, and we're coming to you this evening live from our Brainerd studio. And our next debate is regarding the candidates from House District 10B. And I'm sorry, it's 10A, isn't it? I've got the wrong sheet here. Let's try that again. John Ward is the Democratic candidate, and Chris Kellett is the Republican candidate. So I'm going to take just a moment to review the rules for everyone, and we'll start out with each candidate giving a 3-minute opening comment, and the panel will then ask questions after the opening comments. Some will be their own questions, and some will be questions that are coming from the public. The candidates will rotate the order they speak, beginning with opening comments and finishing with closing comments, which will be 2 minutes each. Each candidate will have a 1-minute rebuttal opportunity, and if you prefer not to have a rebuttal, you can just pass on that opportunity. Questions will continue until we are about 50 minutes into the debate, and then we will come to the closing section where each candidate will have the opportunity to make their closing comments. I'd like to also introduce our panel. Our distinguished panel of 35 people is down to 2. Dennis Wyman is the news director for Lakeland Public Television, and he is seen often on this station, of course. Scott Hall is the news director for KAXE Radio in Grand Rapids. So welcome to you for our second round this evening. We have a predetermined rotation here, so we're going to start out with that rotation, and we're going to start with opening comments from Representative, or I'll just call you Mr. Ward for the evening. Mr. Ward, it's your turn.
Thank you, Ray. I want to start by saying thank you to the sponsors and all who helped put the debate together. My name is John Ward, and I'm the current state representative from District 12A. I have had the honor and privilege of serving, helping, and representing you for the last 6 years. I am married to my best friend, Sally. We've been married for over 38 years. We have 4 children and 7 grandchildren. I was a teacher and a coach for over 33 years. Sally and I are also licensed insurance agents, and we have a small insurance business. I have always been engaged in many leadership roles in my church, my community, and my profession. You know, my friends, I've been out doing lots of door knocking, and I was always attending many community events and community meetings. Often I hear, you know, Representative Ward, I see you everywhere and at everything. Thank you for that. I believe as an elected official, it is our duty to be visible and accessible to our constituents. Always, not just during campaign season. I have also heard many times, many comments from people on the doors like these. Representative Ward, thank you for helping me with my problem or my concern. Thank you for trying so hard to improve our children's educational opportunities. Thank you for fighting to lower my rising property taxes. Thank you for bringing jobs and improving our economics in our area. Thank you for your dedication, your knowledge, honesty, caring, and positive attitude. Thank you for your willingness to work across the aisle in a bipartisan and compromising way to get things done. You know, there have been many more great comments like that, but I want to tell you, thank you. Thank you for blessing me with one of the greatest opportunities of my life in order so that I can make a difference in many people's lives. And thank you for the faith that you have in me. A recent email that I received from a constituent had a comment that I often frequently hear as well. And it said, Representative Ward, although I disagree with some of your positions on issues, I think there is no question that you are a sincere, passionate, and well-intended legislator and person. While we may not always agree, you can count on John Ward to be honest and do whatever he can to make the quality of your lives better. I just don't talk the talk. I walk the walk. I have proudly earned the support and endorsement of groups representing education, pro-life, small businesses, NRA, conservation, tourism, veterans, labor, and many, many more. One significant endorsement I just received was from Representative John Kriesel. Representative Kriesel is a Republican who also is an Iraq war veteran who lost his legs. Unfortunately, Representative Kriesel is leaving the State House. But he sent me a campaign contribution with a note that said, Representative Ward, I proudly endorse you because we need more people like you to serve the citizens of the United States, citizens of Minnesota. I also hope to earn one more endorsement that is very, very important, yours. I look forward to tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Ms. Kellett.
Hello, thank you for having me here. My name is Chris Kellett, and I come to you not as a politician, but as a concerned citizen that has made public service a way of life. I was raised in Minnesota and moved here to the Brainerd Lakes area about 20 years ago, and I consider this my home. In the past, I've worked as a counselor, helping adults, teens, and veterans. I also worked with businesses as a corporate support representative here at Lakeland Public Television, and also as a marketing director, and recently, I guess a few years ago, started my own business as a marketing and website design consultant. I've held many key leadership positions over the years in many area service clubs and on nonprofit boards, including Kiwanis, Kids Against Hunger, Chamber Ambassadors, Rosenmeyer Center for State and Local Government, Crisis Line, Crossing Arts Alliance, the Brainerd Library Board, Sertoma, and more. I am also a proud member of the NRA. In recent years, our area has been strained economically. Many have suffered the devastating loss of their jobs, businesses, savings, and homes. These people are our neighbors, and they are suffering. I have witnessed this firsthand as I started serving civil papers on the side last winter to earn some additional income. I was surprised that many of the people are good, hardworking people, many middle-class homes, many with children, many were seniors, and many, or even some were business owners that were losing everything. If you can imagine the look in their eyes and on their faces as I had to give them the sad news, one after another, you can understand why I got to the point where I knew I had to do something. My fellow citizens, this has to stop, and I want to do all I can to turn this around. The key difference between me and my opponent is how we approach this problem. Since my opponent took office 6 years ago, our area has reached epidemic levels, being among the highest in the state in unemployment and foreclosures. Since January of 2006, when my opponent was sworn in, almost 2,000 families in Crow Wing County have lost their homes, and almost 300 homes are pending foreclosure right now. As Einstein once said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. My opponent's approach of growing government and taking your hard-earned tax dollars to spend on short-term government grants and programs or borrowing more money for the same is just not working. I believe we need to get back to the tried and true methods that will invigorate a strong economy and create sustainable jobs. Reducing government, streamlining regulations, and lowering taxes for all, putting more money in your pocket to spend, and making it easier and more appealing for businesses to grow and expand, to move and expand here. My beliefs are for smaller, limited, smarter government, fiscal responsibility, and a strict adherence to the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kellett. Our first question from the panel this evening will come from Mr. Wyman, and it will be directed towards Ms. Kellett.
Thanks, Ray, and thanks to both of you for participating tonight, sharing your views with our viewers tonight. Minnesota's Constitution requires state funding for education, but a lack of adequate funding has forced many school districts to pass school levies to make up the differences. That, in turn, has raised property taxes in the districts that did pass the levies and created some inequality with the districts that didn't pass the levies. What should the state's role be in funding education, both early childhood through 12th, actually let's just talk right now, early childhood through 12th grade, maybe we'll get into higher education a little later. Should the state be doing more to fund education, or is this just the way of the times with the current economy?
Okay, that's a very good question. Thank you. First of all, we have had a disparity between the Minneapolis area schools and the Brainerd schools for many years now. And so far to date, nothing's really been done about it. The Minneapolis children are currently receiving like $14,000 to $15,000 per child per year. And we're at about $8,000 to $9,000 up here in the Brainerd Lakes area. I think that needs to change. We need to do some more to make that more equalized. And so whether or not we have, I'm thinking we have the money just follow the student and have a base amount per child and go from there. But regardless, that is something that I will be fighting for if I'm lucky enough to get elected in St. Paul. I also think we need to do more for our teachers. We need to be giving our teachers more tools, especially tools to help with a child's development. Textbooks are becoming obsolete. Our children are very technologically savvy, and our teachers need to have more support in learning how to keep up with our students that way. And also, I think that with textbooks becoming obsolete, we can do more with our iPads. So I think we need to help our teachers to better utilize how to give some individual attention to the student. And we have tools out there today that can bring the parent and the teacher and the student closer together on a daily or weekly basis. And the best part about it is we can do all this and save our taxpayers a lot of money. So I think that's something that we need to take a look at. And again, I'm going to just say one thing. Can you imagine being a manager today and not being able to utilize the current computer programs that we have out there? I think we need to be doing more for our teachers, our parents, and our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ward.
Well, thank you for the question. And this is a question that hits home to me very personally. I was an educator for 33 years. I ran for office because I saw public education becoming dismantled. You know, Minnesota used to be ranked in the top 10 of the states for their funding. They are now 22nd. Minnesota used to rank top in the nation for class size. We're now 47th. You know, when you look at school funding over the past decade, with inflation adjusted, actually the funding for schools has dropped by 13%. So one of the things that I did in 2006 when I decided to run was to advocate and be a champion for public education. 95% of the students in the state of Minnesota attend public education. That's where our tax dollars need to go. That is where we need to support all of the students in the state of Minnesota. Now, I'm glad you asked about early childhood. I sat on the Early Childhood Committee and was either a chief or co-author of many bills for early childhood and quality child care. We know that we get an investment return on $16 for every dollar invested in early childhood. We also know that in the future that helps eliminate special education, lowers the criminal justice problems, and so an investment in education is something that is very, very critical and important. And by the way, it also adds to the economic growth of our local area for jobs. We have to have an educated workforce. Maybe we'll get into a little bit about educated workforce and the need for jobs in our area. But education is the key for opening doors to opportunity for every student and every parent and every family in the state of Minnesota. We haven't adequately been doing that, and we need to start.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Ms. Kellett, would you like to?
Yes, I would just like to also say that I come from a family of teachers, and education is extremely important to me. I also find it a tragedy that we borrowed over $2 billion, I think $2.5 billion from our schools because we were spending too much money and didn't have it to pay. So, and I'm very sad that my opponent voted to borrow that money and also voted against paying it back 3 times. And instead of having that money being returned back to our schools, it's been sitting in a bank in St. Paul. And we did have the reserves to pay for it, but again, he voted against paying it back, and I don't understand why that doesn't make sense to me.
Thank you. Mr. Ward, would you like a rebuttal?
Absolutely. And I want to correct my opponent. She's absolutely telling half-truths and wrong information again like she has in the past. So make sure that you tune in and you hear the correct response. I did not vote for borrowing $2.4 billion from our kids. That is absolutely wrong. I did not vote for borrowing $700 million out of tobacco bonds for our state. When we borrow from our kids, it has absolutely created problems within our school districts because they have to go out and borrow money. When we hold that money back, they have to go out and borrow money. It costs our school districts interest and money in order to operate their programs within their district. The other thing that I want to correct is that I voted against an irresponsible, fiscally irresponsible plan to pay back the schools. The Department of Commerce Commissioner, the Department of Revenue Commissioner, every fiscal agent down in St. Paul said this is not a wise plan. I did, however, my opponent, vote for a responsible plan to pay our schools back at a much quicker rate. So please be informed of what half-truths are and the honesty of it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ward. Our next question is coming from Mr. Hall, and it will be directed towards Mr. Ward.
So let's talk about what you think would be a fiscally responsible way to restore school funding.
Oh, I'd be glad to. I've been proud to, over my first 4 years in the legislature, I was actually the vice chair of Education Finance Committee. The Education Finance Committee is the committee that oversees funding for finances for the funding of all of our schools in the state of Minnesota. As the vice chair of the funding committee, I was also a co-author on the new Minnesota Miracle Bill. Now, the new Minnesota Miracle Bill, we have a broken funding formula. There's lots of problems with school funding, and a broken funding formula is a main problem. So we crafted over a period of 2 years a number of stakeholders, including myself, including other people that were engaged in public education, crafted a bill called the New Minnesota Miracle. And it was the single best funding idea and program since the first original Minnesota Miracle in the 1970s. I also want to talk about seasonal rec property. I have chief authored for the last 6 years a bill to make sure seasonal rec people don't have to pay towards our operating school levies. So that means that money is not being generated for our school children. That means you and I are paying more for operating levies in our own districts. So I sponsored a bill. I was a chief author of a bill for the last 6 years to repeal that, to make sure that the seasonal rec people were paying their fair share. And then also, I want to talk about special ed costs. That's another critical component with education funding. The federal government promised in 1972 that they would reimburse the states and the local education agencies 40% of the special education costs. Our special education population has exploded. Now, we are serving all children, which is a right thing to do. But the federal government has only reimbursed the states 19% of the costs. That's wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Ms. Kellett.
Well, this is a chance to continue and respond to my opponent. In 2010, my opponent did vote to borrow $2 billion from our schools, and I'll be happy to put that up on my website. He also voted against paying it back 3 times. I know one of those bills was HF 2083, and you're welcome to look that up on the House of Representatives website, and also I will link that on mine. As far as education goes, I think that we know that our school budgets are very tight. When Representative Ward had the chance to help our local school districts stretch their dollars further by letting them opt out of unfunded mandates imposed by the state, he said no. I'm referring to House Journal 12649, and I will also post that on my website. He believes that those in St. Paul know better how to educate our kids better than our local school board members and educators. I believe that we need to give more power to our local school districts to make decisions and less power to the state. I understand that we need to hold teachers accountable, but we also need to let a lot of the decision making become more localized, because I think that we here know better what's best for our kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Would you like a rebuttal?
Absolutely. And I've been down there 6 years and taken thousands of votes. And you can reference any House Journal, you can reference any kind of vote that anybody has taken. I know when other state legislators, incumbents have sat in this position, the same tactic has been used against them. Now, you, my friends, know what kind of representative I have been. You, my friends, know what kind of an education champion I have been. You, my friends, have talked to me and told me over and over and over again, thank you, Representative Ward, for trying to do everything to improve our children's educational opportunities. So, I walk the walk. I just don't talk the talk. My actions, my 6-year record, which I am very proud of for education battling and advocating and leading, I am very proud of. And I will not sit here and be attacked with falsities and innuendos. A lot of the votes that you take are on terrible omnibus bills. So, whatever.
Ms. Kellett, you still have 1 minute rebuttal if you'd like.
Sure. I would just like to say that I don't believe that this is false, and I'll be happy to put it on my website. Representative Ward did opt to try to vote to pay back our schools. He would not work with the Republican legislators on paying back the schools with the money that we had in reserves. He wanted to pay back the schools with a tax increase, and that is the way Representative Ward does things. That's part of the reason why we're in the mess that we're in right now, is because we've got, frankly, way too many taxes, and we need to give ourselves, we need a break from all this heavy government. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Our next question will come from Mr. Wyman. It will be directed towards Ms. Kellett.
Okay, fittingly enough, that's the next question. We're going to talk about economic development. Brainerd, the latest numbers that just came out for the Brainerd Lakes area show 6.5% unemployment in Brainerd. What is your vision for economic development for the area? What will it take to get this economy turned around?
Thank you. Well, first of all, we're the 4th highest state in the country in our corporate income tax. We're also the 5th highest in our individual income tax. We are so heavily taxed, and this all relates to job creation. We also have a maze of red tape and regulations for our business owners, and including our small business owners. Right now, 80% of our jobs come from our small businesses. So we need to do all we can to support our small businesses, to help them, inspire them to start here, and also help them to survive and thrive here. We need to let me go back here. We need to incentivize our businesses, not just with streamlining the regulations. We need to lower all our taxes. My opponent voted against numerous tax incentives to reduce the tax burden on business owners, homeowners, and even veterans, which in my opinion all stifles job creation. And I will continue to explain that. We need to understand that we also have a lot of competition right now. In China, they're able to do things a lot cheaper than we can do here. How do we compete with places like China here in Minnesota? And I will tell you how. Through innovation. And one of the things we need to do is stop stifling our business owners. We need to take the boots off the throats of our business owners and let them innovate and create. We are making it so hard for them. Reagan, Clinton, and JFK all did one thing. They lowered taxes for everyone. And guess what happened? When they lowered taxes, they inspired, it invigorated the economy, because when you have more money in your pocket, you will spend it or you will invest it. And that creates a healthy economy. That creates jobs. I do not believe jobs are created through government programs, grants, and borrowing more money to do the same. That all comes from the taxpayers, who I believe are already way too strained. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ward.
Well, thank you. And again, let's be honest with our constituents. Let's tell the truth. Let's not tell half-truths. Economic growth and job development is critical to our area. We have some of the highest unemployment in the area, and we all know that. And how are we going to fix that if we don't work together? If we don't work together to make sure that the economic development happens and the job growth happens. So, partnerships are very important. Every job created, every job retained in this area is key and critical. Whether it's a public sector job, a private sector job, a full-time job, a part-time job, every job is critical for our constituents. And quite frankly, there are a lot of good partnerships, private, public partnerships that are happening and that have paid big dividends. The other thing that I want to mention is I sat on the Small Business Caucus, bipartisan Small Business Caucus in the House, and we offered 12 individual bills in the tax bill for helping our small businesses. Our small businesses are economic drivers, and we know we need to help them. What's killing them, by the way, is high property taxes. And the high property taxes have come from the elimination of market value homestead credit that the Republican majority insisted that they pass through. So, you know what? We have to help the small businesses. And in the Small Business Caucus, the 12 bills that we presented, 2 of them were my bills. 2 of them, I proudly say, were my bills to help our local small businesses. Another thing that we need to provide and use are all the economic tools that are proven and worthwhile, like the Minnesota Investment Fund, like the Angel Investor Tax Credit, like tax increment finance. All of those kind of programs have been used in our district for business expansion, job growth, economic development. So there are many, many good programs, economic development programs, that are very worthwhile, that are very important, along with bonding as well.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Ms. Kellett.
Well, I think part of reaching across the aisle is also listening to our business owners and hearing what they have to say. My opponent's voting record, and this is being honest here, and I have been honest with you, is he scored extremely low, between 0 and 18% with the Minnesota Chamber and NFIB Minnesota. That tells me a lot. That should tell you a lot. We also need to remember our veterans. Right here in Crow Wing County, we have the highest number of unemployed veterans. If you add up all the veterans in the state of Minnesota, we actually have more unemployed veterans right here. My opponent voted against a tax deduction for businesses to hire veterans. I think this is wrong, and I promise you that I would never vote against our veterans. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ward.
Well, as I said, I ended by saying, another important tool is bonding. And talk to me about economic development over in the Kuna Rec area, where I sponsored a bonding bill to bring forth the mountain biking trails, nationally renowned mountain biking trails, which has changed the economic growth, the job growth in that area. Talk to me about Central Lakes College bonding projects that I have chief authored and sponsored to make sure that jobs are created in this area and that our public infrastructure is well and sound and be able to be used in the future. Talk to me about a Vikings bill that it was a jobs bill as well. I mean, so it's easy to sit here and say my opponent voted this way and that way. That's really easy to do. That's good talking points and rhetoric. But the fact of the matter is, I don't answer to the Minnesota State Chamber. I answer to the Brainerd Lakes Chamber, the Kuna Lakes Chamber, the Nisswa Lakes Chamber, the Pequot Lakes Chamber. And those chambers have all told me, thank you for the work that you do, Representative Ward.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ward. Our next question will come from Mr. Hall, and it will be directed towards Mr. Ward.
Public education spending is probably the largest part of the state budget, I think by far. But the second largest part is healthcare spending, and it looks like, and it's also the fastest growing part of the state budget, with healthcare costs going up. So, and it looks like over the next 10 to 20 years, we're going to get older. Our population is aging like the rest of the country, and the pressures on the state budget from healthcare spending is going to be a lot stronger too with an aging population. So what's your vision of controlling the costs or dealing with those pressures on the state budget from healthcare spending?
Well, thank you, Scott, for that question. That's the healthcare is one of the most problematic issues that we have in the nation, in our state, in our area. Many people's bankruptcies come from a health issue where they don't have any insurance, or they have a devastating health accident that causes bankruptcy. I have always been supportive of health care for all, and access to quality health care, access to comprehensive health care, but that also includes mental health care, dentistry, psychiatric care, chemical dependency care. So right now, the Affordable Care Act, is under scrutiny, obviously, and depends upon what happens in November. We'll see what happens with that. There are some good pieces in that, and there are some bad pieces in that. But what I want the constituents to know, is I've been a supporter, a co-author on a bill called the Minnesota Health Plan. The Minnesota Health Plan is a plan that provides quality health care for all citizens of the state of Minnesota, comprehensive health care for all the citizens of the state of Minnesota, portable health care for all the citizens of the state of Minnesota, and it's a bipartisan bill. It is a bill that we move a little bit each year, but we haven't gotten the whole thing done yet. But it's a bill that I think is very important in Minnesota to create health care coverage for all of our citizens. Now, the other thing about the Affordable Health Care Act is that Minnesota needs to be working on its own health care exchange. All the states are supposed to come up with their own health care exchange by January 1st of 2013. And if we don't, the federal government will do that for us. So, in my opinion, we need to make sure that we are working we in Minnesota are working to have a Minnesota Health Exchange. Now, the House Republicans, the House Democrats, and the Senate Democrats have all agreed to work towards that. The Senate Republicans say, no, we don't want anything to do with the health exchange. I think that's wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Ms. Kellett.
Well, actually, I do believe that as a state that we are much better off offering some sort of a healthcare exchange than letting the federal government come in and try to take over more of our lives. I think the federal government has reached its hands way too far into our personal lives, and I think healthcare is about as personal as you can get. And so anyway, I do have a problem with Obamacare. One of the main problems I have with that is that it will actually destroy our small businesses across this country, and I'm very afraid of that. So anything that we can do as a state, I think, is a great idea. You know, and it's a tragedy, I think, actually, with the Obamacare, because I have looked through some of the pages in the bill, and frankly, it is pretty scary. So anyway, I would agree that we need to do something more localized. We have a wonderful Minnesota Care program. We could expand that for people who can't afford it. Another problem that we do have is that we don't really allow competition between insurance companies here in Minnesota. We've got 2 companies that basically are writing, you know, over 70% of all of our health care. Now, what happens when there is no competition? Well, prices go sky high, and it's you know, well, you know how it is when there's competition, then prices usually go down, and people are competing for your money. So I think we need to allow more competition in the state of Minnesota with our health care coverage. Thank you.
Mr. Ward.
Well, I just want to, and I'm glad to hear that my opponent finally says that I did something good with the Minnesota Health Plan. That's remarkable. I appreciate that, because the Minnesota Health Plan is remarkable, and it will do good things for our citizens in the state of Minnesota, just like Governor Dayton did in one of his first executive orders with the expansion, the immediate expansion of MA, and was able to put some of the poorest and sickest citizens in the state of Minnesota on health care coverage that we eliminated through the General Assistance Medical Program. So, you know, I salute Governor Dayton and his Health and Human Services Commissioner, Lucinda Jessen, that they put in the expansion of MA, the federal expansion, and we're able to provide more coverage. But we still have people that are not covered. And that is problematic, because when those people are not covered, where they go to get their health coverage? Right to the emergency room, some of the most costly health care there is. So this is a huge, huge problem, and one that we better make sure that we fix soon.
Thank you. Ms. Kellett, would you like a rebuttal?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Move on to Mr. Wyman. We'll ask the next question, and it will be directed towards Ms. Kellett.
Okay. Thanks, Ray. We've already talked about economic development and job creation. Tourism is an industry that drives the economy in your district. If elected to St. Paul, what would you as a lawmaker do to support the tourism industry?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I think, you know, we do need to make sure that our roads are great to be up here, and I do actually think it's wonderful that we have the Paul Bunyan Trail and other things for people to enjoy while they are up here. But I would like to get back to talking to you about taxes. When we have money in our pockets, we tend to spend it and invest it, and guess what? We go on vacations. When the government keeps taking money out of our pockets, we have less money. We have less jobs. Because of our economic situation here right now, we are, you know, not seeing as many tourists coming up to the Brainerd Lakes area as we would have otherwise. So we need to fix that here in Minnesota, because a lot of the people that come here up to the Brainerd Lakes area in Crow Wing County are usually from the Twin Cities area, and frankly, they're hurting too. So we need to get money back into people's pockets and let us grow. That's all. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Ward.
Well, I'm going to get back to what the question is all about, and that's tourism. Tourism is a key and critical industry in our area. Matter of fact, it's a key and critical industry in the state of Minnesota. It's the second largest industry in the state of Minnesota. $11 million industry in the state of Minnesota. 250,000 jobs in the state of Minnesota. And in our area, obviously, tourism is critical and important. Now, I am endorsed by the Hospitality of Minnesota, which is all related to tourism industry. Our restaurants, our bars, our resorts, our campgrounds, they have endorsed me because they have seen me champion legislation to help and improve our tourism industry up here, whether it be with a chief authored a bill for our campgrounds on a backwater flow preventer early in my career, or whether it be to recently I met with the governor, with Lisa Paxton, and several other leaders in the state on tourism and how we can improve the marketing dollar for Explore Minnesota tourism. And we presented a proposal that I have helped craft, and the governor's on board. And so we're really excited about the opportunity to really move tourism forward from that $11 billion industry to a $20 billion industry. Now, I sit on the Explore Minnesota Tourism Council as well, and I also want to say that, so I have input there. I have taught numerous times at the resort and campground industry. They asked me to come in and speak to them because I have championed so many tourism kind of bills. But I also want to remind people that the Mississippi River Northwoods project, which was going to be defeated in the House, and that is a project about tourism back here in our district, was passed due to my efforts, a lot of people's efforts. But I was the one that championed that in the House and made it happen.
Mr. Ward, we're going to just take a stop for just a real quick second here. You've lost your microphone. So we'll give Ms. Kellett a chance for rebuttal here, and then we'll try to get you mic'd up during that process. So Ms. Kellett, if you have a rebuttal, we'd move to that.
Sure. I would just like to say that I agree with Mr. Ward that tourism is extremely important to this area, and I would do everything I can to encourage tourism here in the Brainerd Lakes area. But the number one thing I think we need to do to encourage tourism is to get money back in people's pockets so that they can have family vacations again. Right now, did you know that state spending has gone up? Not state spending, let me back up a minute. State income has gone up 45% in the last 10 years. 6 of those, my opponent has been in office. So let's look at that. So 45%, has your income gone up 45%? And we're still spending money. So I think we need to cut down on the spending, and we need to get money back in people's pockets. And to me, it all comes down to taxes. And to me, the more money you have in your pocket, the more freedom you have, and the more you can enjoy life here in Minnesota.
Thank you. Mr. Ward, I think we got you mic'd up again. Would you like to do a rebuttal to
Just
that?
in time. So, I would like to know the specific plan you have to put money back into people's pocket. I keep hearing you say that. And then also I keep hearing you say, you're going to support education, you're going to support here. That all costs money, but you're going to lower taxes and you're going to cut government. You can't have it both ways. The fact of the matter is, we put money back in people's pockets by providing some property tax relief, because the market value homestead credit created in rural Minnesota a very, very economic hardship for our citizens, our small businesses, our citizens, our farmers, had significant hurt and hardship in greater Minnesota due to that. So I'd be interested in hearing some specifics from my opponent on how she plans on doing some of the things that she says she's going to do.
Okay. Moving on to the next question will come from Mr. Hall, and it'll be directed towards Mr. Ward.
Well, there's a cloud kind of hanging over our tourism industry here in northern Minnesota, and that has to do with some environmental factors, the pressure on our lake shore, the development pressure on our lake shore, and its threat to the water quality, and of course the aquatic invasive species called AIS, and our attempts to try to control them, keep them from coming into our waters and destroying the habitat of our lakes and streams. So what in the Brainerd Lakes area is very concentrated in terms of the lake use and water use. So what are your thoughts on controlling aquatic invasive species?
And that's me first, correct?
Yes, correct.
Well, let me talk about 2 pieces that, Scott, that you just mentioned. I'll wait on aquatic invasive species. I want to talk about shoreline standards to start with, because the shoreline standards is also a piece that needs to be addressed to make sure that our lakes have quality water and not polluted and not impaired. So when I first was down there, my first year down there, I was a chief author of a bill to make sure that we had shoreline standards passed. Now, we, again, had a huge stakeholder group. I like working across the aisle. I like working together with people. I like working with the experts and crafting legislation that is meaningful and purposeful and that will have results, effective and efficient and fiscally responsible. We did that with shoreland standards. We passed it in the House. We passed it in the Senate. We sent it off to Governor Plenty at that time. He vetoed it. He vetoed it. So came back, and now the shoreland standards are kind of sitting with the DNR. But that is a critical component that we also need to pass. Now, aquatic invasive species. I have been proud to be a champion, again, in that area. I have authored legislation over and over and over again to work towards the stop of the spread of aquatic invasive species. Now, the truth of the matter is the only solution to solve aquatic invasive species is going to come through science. That's why last year we used some bonding dollars to go to the University of Minnesota for research and development in trying to find the solution, the cure to take care of aquatic invasive species. But in the meantime, we have to do everything we can to stop the spread. The fines were the fines for penalties this year were doubled, and they were doubled because of my action. I offered an amendment on the House floor that I have offered at least a half a dozen times and have failed every time until the last time.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ward. Ms. Kellett.
Well, both of my grandparents, Fred and Mildred, were teachers here in the area, and that just brings up the point about education again. I think the best thing that we can do to take good care of our lakes is to educate, educate, educate. Yes, we do have a problem with zebra mussels and aquatic invasive species, and there's a number of consequences that can happen from that if we do not take action. And so I think actually we have a really active group of people up north that are being very, very good with education, and I think we need to support that. When Mr. Ward talks about bonding, I just want to let you know what bonding means. Bonding means borrowing. So when we have a bonding bill, we're borrowing more money. Means we do not have the money in the account to pay for it, so we are therefore borrowing. Thanks.
Mr. Ward.
Well, again, I agree with Chris in the point that we have to provide education. We've been providing that education, by the way, and the fact of the matter is, we still have a too high of a violation rate. The DNR folks are at the landings. We have increased the staff for inspections. We have increased our education opportunities, and yet we have violations and people not following the law at a very high percent. That's disheartening. But we need to do everything that we can to stop that spread. That's why I'm hosting a forum up in Ideal Township on October 17th from 6:30 to 8. Okay, it's a selfish plug, I'm sorry, but it's an important topic to our area. It's an important topic to our area, and the DNR folks are going to be there. We're going to have some Lake Association folks there. I'm working with Crow Wing Lakes and River Alliance, and it is an area that we better make sure in this central Minnesota that we are on top of, because if we lose our lakes, we lose our tourism industry, we lose our jobs, we lose our economic growth, all of it.
Ms. Kellett. Rebuttal.
Okay. I would just like to say that hosting a forum is a wonderful idea. Unfortunately, a lot of people are leaving. They usually leave around the 1st of October to go down to warmer climates that are up in our lake areas. So I think it's really important that we have more education in the spring when they come back. And whether I'm elected or not, I'd be happy to host a forum in the spring when I think that's the most effective time to have a forum. And speaking of education, I would just like to respond to Mr. Ward's question about how we would pay for the education. If we did more electronic education, it would actually save us a boatload of money. No pun intended with the aquatic thing. But anyway, it would save us a lot of money. And again, getting taxes lowered also help everything. So my opponent has a 0 score 6 years in a row with the Taxpayers League. So again, I think that we can pay for a lot of things if we can have the money back in our pockets where it belongs. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next question is our last question, and it'll come from Mr. Wyman, and it'll be directed towards Ms. Kellett.
If elected, you'll be representing your party in St. Paul. You'll also be representing District 10A. When push comes to shove, will you break from your party to do what you feel is better for the district, or vice versa, I guess? And if so, give me some examples of areas where you may may have some different thoughts than what your party advocates?
That's a really good question. First of all, I think, my opponent talks a lot about bipartisanship, and I just would like to talk to you a little bit about that. I think, we have both good ideas and bad ideas on both sides of the aisle. And so I think it's really important for someone to look at, is this a good idea? And number one goal should not be, will this get me reelected? And unfortunately, we have legislators that do that often, and they're more concerned about how it's going to look to them on the next term than it is on how it's going to affect people like right here 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So we need to take a look at that and see what are the real consequences, and we need to have people that are representing us that are more concerned about doing the right thing than in getting reelected. Now, with that said, if somebody on the other side of the board has a great idea, yes, of course I would support it. If somebody on the wrong side of the board has a bad idea, no, I'm not going to support it. And if someone on my side of the board has a bad idea, no, I'm not going to support it. It's about doing what's right for the people and doing what's right for our people here in this area. And as an elected representative, I would be representing you, our viewers here in District 10A, and that would be my number one priority. And if you're a Republican, Democrat, Independent, don't know anything about politics at all, I believe that it's my job to represent you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ward.
Well, Dennis, that is a great question, because in Washington, D.C. and in St. Paul right now, the biggest problem is gridlock and partisanship. When I'm on the doors, I hear people say, can't you folks just get along? Can't you work together? Can't you make sure that you compromise? That you compromise. You give a little bit and meet in the middle. And there are people stuck on the left and there are people stuck on the right. And that is the biggest problem in Washington, D.C. and in St. Paul, in my opinion. When we went to a state shutdown, the governor offered the Republican majority party 7 compromises, and they rejected all of them, until he finally said, okay, this is hurting the citizens of the state of Minnesota too much. So the question was, how do you vote? How do you break away from your caucus, or what we call your caucus or your party? When I take a vote down in St. Paul, I vote my conscience first, my constituents second, and my caucus or my party third. And that is how I take all votes. That is why I am the pro-life endorsed candidate. I have a 97% pro-life voting record over my 6 years. That is why I'm the NRA endorsed candidate, because I vote for my conscience, my constituents, and my caucus last. And let me give you a specific example. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we were going to make some significant mental health cuts to school-aged children. And I stood up in my caucus meeting and on the House floor and said, I will not support, and any of my fellow Democrats that believe in mental health services, we will not support and vote for any cuts, any major cuts to our children's mental health programs. And I meant it, and they knew I meant it, and so did some of my other colleagues, and we broke away. I broke away from, my caucus. When I take a pro-life vote, I break away from my caucus. An NRA vote, I break away from my caucus. So there's many specific examples.
Thank you. Ms. Kellett.
Well, I would just like to mention that my opponent has an 87% pro-life voting with MCCL, and they have not endorsed, to my knowledge, John Ward. They did let me know, however, that I have a 100% score with them this year, and he has 87. So I would just like you to know that I am very pro-life. And as far as the NRA is concerned, I am extremely dedicated to supporting our gun rights. Our Second Amendment right is something that I am very passionate about, and in fact, they'd have to take my life before I would do a bad gun vote that would take away any of our rights from our gun owners. I think that's the most important right we have. It is the right that protects all others, and you can be sure that I would support our rights to bear arms.
Thank you. Mr. Ward.
Well, as I will, and that's why I'm the NRA endorsed candidate. But let me be clear. I am the endorsed MCCL candidate. I don't know why my opponent, where she's been, because it's been publicized. It's out on their websites everywhere that they publicize it. I do not have an 87%. I have a 97%. If she looks at the voting records and understands the voting records like you should and like you can. The one time I got I got marked against voting on some pro-life stuff, my father was dying. And I spent the time with my father, and because I wasn't there for a pro-life vote, I got it marked against me, which is fine. But I still have a 97%, proudly have a 97% pro-life voting record. I am the MCCL endorsed candidate, no matter what she says. Again, we have some half-truths and misinformation. So please make sure that you do your homework on this.
All right, thank you. That brings us to the close of our question and answer period, and now we go to the closing comments, and we will start with Mr. Ward.
Well, again, thank you to everyone involved in putting on this forum. You know, my friends, my constituents, tonight was not about me, and tonight was not even about my opponent. Tonight, my friends, it is about you. It is about you. This is a very, very important election. It will likely determine the future and the path of our nation, our state, and our area. You have a clear choice. You've seen and heard that tonight. You know, if you listen to my opponent, you would think that I was the worst legislator in St. Paul, for crying out loud. You know, but you know it different. You know it different because you've told me you know it different. You've been very thankful of my efforts over the last 6 years, and I appreciate that. So my constituents, my friends, if you want a proven, effective, knowledgeable, experienced, and reliable legislator who listens to you, who gets the job done for you, who has his priorities as your priorities, has your priorities as his priorities, who you can trust, who responds to your communications immediately, who tirelessly works for you, who you can count on, who is accessible to you, who represents you, and who cares about you, then please, my friends, vote for me, Representative John Ward, on November 6th. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Ms. Kellett.
Thank you. I would just like to take this moment to thank Lakeland Public Television and our journalists for the time to organize this event. And also I would like to thank you for taking the time to become an informed voter and learn about the differences between Mr. Ward and I. I encourage all of you to take the time to exercise your most important right, your right to vote on November 6th. It is the way that each of us can have a voice in the direction that our government, and who we want to serve us as our elected officials. I believe the plan that I've laid out here today is the best way to revitalize our area, improve our economy, promote business growth, and bring quality, sustainable jobs to the Brainerd Lakes area. Please take a look around. I know that we've had a lot of things exchanged, but I've been out there. I've looked. I've seen what's going on in the neighborhoods and the streets. We have a lot of empty houses in a lot of neighborhoods and a lot of streets. A lot of us know neighbors that have lost their homes, lost their jobs. They're struggling to pay their bills. We need to change that. I respect my opponent, and I credit him for his willingness to serve. I do believe we both have the same goal in mind. We just have different ideas on how to get there. To me, the choice is simple. Do you want to have more government, more spending, more taxes, or do you want to have less government, less spending, and less taxes? To me, your taxes, our tax dollars, is our property and our freedom. And to me, by lowering taxes, I'm actually helping to have you keep your property and preserve your freedom. And I will fight to reduce taxes, streamline redundant regulations and permits, and help you keep more of your hard-earned money and invest as you see fit. I would appreciate your vote on November 6th. Please go to my website, votechriskellett.com, and find out more, and I will put the details on there too about John Ward's voting record. Thank you very much.
Thank you to both of the candidates for taking the time out to spend time with Lakeland Public Television. We appreciate it very much, and good luck down the road in your last 30-some days of campaigning. Thank you also for staying on time. It helps us out greatly. Remember, if you didn't get a chance to see this, you know someone who didn't get a chance to see this program this evening, in about 24 hours this will be on our website, Lakeland Public Television, or lptv.org, and you can watch it as many times as you like. So thank you for that. Our next candidate interviews will be at 9 o'clock in about 5 or 6 minutes, and this will be with House District 10B. So we hope to see you there. I'm Ray Gildow, live from our Brainerd studio. Good evening.